So let's now look at the first round of theories we are talking about here. So I encourage you to really embrace these theories with a critical eye because you don't want to just take them for granted. All of them will have weaknesses and positive things you can really learn from them. So the other thing I want to say is, while I cover a range of theories in these lectures, you will find many other theories in the textbooks we have listed for this week. And feel free to use those even if they have not been covered in the lectures, because we simply cannot cover all of the existing sociological theories which help us understand organizations. So all I just want you to do in assessment one is to be able to choose a theory, choose at least three theories, and see whether those are really linked to, the ideas or the problems you have identified in the organization. I would simply be concerned if you used a theory which is not relevant to understanding an organization. And I think the main mistakes students are more likely to make in that assessment piece is sometimes to choose a theory which is a good theory but has a clinical focus rather than an organizational focus. So if you chose a theory like psychodynamic theory, for example, which might be just another theory, then that's a theory, but I would be concerned that, oh, this theory has actually a clinical focus, and I don't think it's the best choice for you to explain an organizational problem. Or if you chose theories like, cognitive behavioral therapies or, solution focused, therapies, then I might be like, oh yeah, that can be theoretically sound, but not, for example, for explaining, organizational problems. It's really important that you take all these considerations. And later in these lectures, I'll be stepping you through how do you choose, a theory to do your analysis of the organizational problems. So what I'll be doing here, really, I'll try to bring into dialogue three classical scholars, Max Weber, um, Henry Fayol, and Frederick Taylor, who are really or some of the most influential scholars in theorizing, about organizations. And you'll find their ideas really relevant, even if these ideas have been developed centuries ago for some, you will still find them relevant even to the problems you are identifying in the organizations where you work. Okay, so let's start with the concept of bureaucracy developed by Max Weber. And I'll really invite you to keep in mind this idea of a machine. You might find this metaphor being used in some of the textbooks, that organizations are almost comparable to machine, rather than just, human relation focused understanding of organizations. But we shall come back to this in a minute. So Weber gives us really a way of understanding organizations that's grounded in rational legal authority. He calls for clear division of labor and high degree of specialization among the workers. And Weber actually argues that authority should be invested in the office, not the person occupying that office. So what this really means is that organizations function through clearly defined rules, procedures, structures, and even policies, not really through personal charisma or individual preferences or even individual relationships. So in a bureaucratic organization, roles are clearly defined, and everyone knows exactly what their job is. So you can see Weber arguing, for example, that organizations function best when authority is rational, rule-bound, and tied to the roles rather than the individuals. Exactly really the same thing we are saying. So there is, in this understanding, a strong emphasis on rules and regulations. And these rules are really designed to create predictability, stability, and fairness in the way we do things in human service organizations. And as Weber puts it, authority should sit in the office, not the person occupying that office. So when we really talk about the CEO, for example, or the executive director of the organization where we are working, the power is not about who they are as an individual. The power is rather about the position they occupy, that title, the position, and all the implications which come with that position is what matters in a bureaucratic understanding of human service organizations. So you can see really this playing out visually in the diagram we have here, where I show on this slide, separate pods or units, each responsible for particular tasks. I think you can see that even in the people sitting on the different desks, with clearly flowing authority from upward through a hierarchical arrangement of organizational functioning. So I also included a flatter structure underneath so you can compare the two and see, maybe develop even more understanding of what we are talking about when we think of bureaucracy. But the key point really here is that bureaucracy is built on hierarchy, specialization, everyone being responsible for something they are specialized in, and formal authority, and that minimal, to no reference at all, or individuals or themselves or who they are, and even the relationships that comes with. So the other way of understanding bureaucracy can be when we think about where we work and the people managing those places where we work. Sometimes there are things we see the people doing, the CEO, the executive director. There might be things you see them doing. And sometimes we simply get angry because, what they are doing, we are not happy with what they are doing. But we don't sometimes remember that they are doing this because there are rules. They are doing this because they want to make sure the rules in place or the policies are being followed instead of just following their insights and intuition. So this is something you'd also immediately recognize wherever you work, whether it's in a human service organization or whether it's in the university where I'm working and where you are studying. You will find these structures being really functioning in a more bureaucratic way. And not only the university, but if you look at Centrelink, Child Safety, Queensland Health, all these are bureaucracies. And they have clear procedures and policy manual which define really the processes, so that if I have maybe an integrity issue or if it's an issue to do with HR, then I know clearly where to go and I know the course of action to take. So again, as I said, all these concepts, bureaucracy and all the other theories we shall be unpacking have they have weaknesses and advantages, and it's always a good idea to approach them in a critical way. So for Max Weber, the organization and this idea of bureaucracy is based on the principle that organizations are structures which function like almost machines, and that there should be specialization, there should be predictability and stability in the roles, and rationality should be the norm. And of course, he insisted later on issues of questions of democracy in the way organizations function. Really important insights to start considering. But again, you need to really keep in mind that, yes, although these ideas are still quite influential today, definitely there will be weaknesses and there will be, limitations to the way we engage with them. So the next thing we really want to look at, the next theory we need to look at, and this comes, almost in a contemporary period with Max Weber's, is Frederick Taylor's concept of scientific management. This was also developed in the 20th century. And I've grouped it really with bureaucracy because both theories focus on structure, order, and rationality. So these are really at the center of both theories. So scientific management theory is all about efficiency. So Frederick Taylor, whom you can see easily on this slide, believed that for every task, there is one best way to do that task. And it's management's job to discover that method through time and motion studies. And once the most efficient method of doing that task is identified, workers should be trained to perform that task in exactly the same way that has been discovered. So to illustrate this, I show you an old photograph here of a Ford factory. So Fordism is often used as an exemplary way of looking at scientific management theory. That's just because really it relies heavily on the production line, which is built on the idea of specialized, repetitive tasks. So one worker might just spend all their entire shift attaching a single part, like the man you can see here in the photo who only puts on a tie, and that can end up being his entire job. And he is simply part of a well-organized, scientifically functioning organization and playing a clearly defined role in, following specific rules. And that's exactly science. It's not something which comes, out of nowhere. So I also show you a clip from Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, which beautifully actually captures the logic of scientific management. So Chaplin's character becomes part of the machine. As you can see, people really here working on, you know, a vehicle and trying to play different roles in that. And I think this really literally and metaphorically, symbolizes a machine kind of functioning, which we started talking about earlier. And of course, this is something again illustrating how the whole idea of efficiency operates in maximizing outputs through repetitive tasks and control. So the scientific management theory developed by Taylor is still very relevant today. And its core principles really are that it's really built on four core principles suggested by Taylor. One of them is science, not the rule of thumb. Second is scientific selection of workers, as I said. Third is management and labor cooperation rather than conflict. And fourth is scientific training of workers. So these ideas are still very relevant today. And one way of looking at them can be the way we think of key performance indicators in the workplaces we have, or even all the other productivity measures, performance reviews, program evaluations, and monetary incentives which we give to workers when we think they are doing well. The whole idea here is really to improve efficiency and effectiveness in the way people do things across organizations. All these are really, again, classical ideas, but they are still relevant in contemporary exploration of how organizations function, including even how human service organizations themselves really operate. And of course, many human service organizations are increasingly adopting these ideas even today in what might be described as outcome focused and neoliberal logics of operating their business or their organizations. So one key takeaway from both the scientific management and the bureaucratic theory is that both theories really are very much criticized for just assuming an organization is something which functions like a machine. And I think the main problem with that is that they end up losing the humanness, the human nature of human service organizations. The other key point here is really that they might be seen, both theories, and especially the scientific management theory, is sometimes criticized of being a little bit simplistic, assuming that people are only motivated by money and that efficiency only comes when we, function like machines and follow rigid rules instead of really, focusing on the human relations or the human nature of the work we do as human service workers. So the next key, and really I'll speak about this very briefly because I think it's also important for you to consider, is the public administration theory, which in a sense was developed by Henry Fayol and many other scholars, being very popular in France and the United Kingdom and the United States. But the whole idea of public administration theory is that you know, guiding principles actually should be at the heart of what we do in human service organizations. And these guiding principles are drawing mostly on Fayol's 14 principles of management. You'll find these, listed in your textbook, but one of them is that each subordinate receives order from only one superior and not many other people. It's kind of really completing, the first two theories we had started unpacking. And the whole idea behind this as well is efficiency in the way we function as organizations. So more importantly, you have many principles outlined by Fayol, but he also insists on the division of work and specialization, which are pretty much the same ideas which had been covered already in Taylor's ideas. But more importantly, what we really inherit from Taylor is this idea of five management functions, the five management functions, the functions which management is supposed to complete or to fulfill in an organization, which, many development theorists have now characterized as POC3. So planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. Planning, which just entails forecasting, setting objectives, and developing means to attain those objectives. Organizing, structuring activities, and organizing individuals with a firm. Commanding, direct supervision and motivation of employees. Coordinating, which just entails identifying, arranging, and scheduling tasks, and controlling, which is constant supervision of employees. So again, these ideas of Fayol, you will find them really many, somehow similar to the previous two theories we have covered. And I thought it's also a good idea to include them in this week's lecture. So far we have covered three key scholars. And if I can sum up, Weber is suggesting that authority should rest in the rules and roles, not personalities. That's really a pretty much straightforward summary of Weber's concept of bureaucracy. Taylor's is suggesting that there is one best way to perform every task, and it should be management discovering that best way of performing tasks and training people through a scientific method of doing things, the scientific management theory. And Fayol is suggesting that management is a universal process built on planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. And these ideas are quite interlinked, and you can see this dialogue really happening among these three classicals. Might really want to expand your knowledge on this. Now, the question, and if we think of the Avalon case study, or even before the Avalon case study, when we apply these theories, and maybe when you start doing your assessment, which questions you might have in mind, when you apply any of these three, theoretical perspectives, if you draw, for example, on the concept of bureaucracy and scientific management, and even um, Fayol's theory, you might see that you are being prompted of asking some key questions about how an organization is set up. You might ask questions such as, what are the lines of authority in this organization? How hierarchical is the structure? Um, are there roles and specializations being clearly defined or demarcated, or are there conflicts of roles? Are there people, struggling to find a difference between their roles? Are there separate teams or pods that handle specific tasks? Is there any flexibility in how roles are carried out, or is there everything highly specialized? So these are just really some of the guiding questions you might be having in mind in analyzing an organization using any of these questions. And if we can think of the Avalon case study, which you will find, in your learning material for this week. So one of the guiding concepts we might have in mind can be questions of efficiency and effectiveness, as we said. And you might look at key performance indicators. You might ask questions around productivity um, and how is that being tracked. So the other questions in the Avalon case study in particular, you might want to seek knowledge of how does management maintain control over the organization and its services. So yeah, you'll have exercises in this weekly material, expanding a little bit on these questions and how you might ask them in applying these theories. Thank you very much and see you soon.